Hello and welcome to a new episode of Prey vs. Predator. We're excited today because this is the first time we're going to be answering a question from one of our listeners. We are going to be exploring today the question of how do we support children who have a predator parent, especially if you as the prey parent are no longer able to be in that situation directly. Amber.
Yeah, first of all, I actually have a question about the question. So if a prey marries a predator and they have a family together, is it automatic that the predator will be a predator to the children? Does it show up differently? How does it all work? I think that that's been a question given to us multiple times. So I think that that's what we're addressing. So the situation is a prey marries a predator, and what happens with the kids?
Yeah, in a way, like I think I know the answer, but I could be wrong. But I know that I have been not in relationship with my predator for the last 10 years. In those 10 years, my kids have done a lot of growing up. So I've been able to observe is my predator acting the same way towards them that they did to me. And I think I just jotted down a couple of things that would perhaps give some clarity around this issue. What your kids want doesn't matter to the predator. The other thing, what the predator wants is what will happen.
Well, they relate to each other, don't they?
Yeah.
That's big.
Have they gotten into a situation with your ex in regards to something they wanted that your ex did not want them to have? Or it was in conflict with what he wanted?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Can you give an example?
Oh, boy. Yeah. My predator is in a new relationship now, and my kids are older, they're driving, they have jobs, they're young adults. And my kids had the kid car, and the kid car was about, 10 years old and needed some work on it. And because they have a life and they have jobs and they're in school and they need to get from point A to point B, my predator took the kid car to a garage to see how much it would cost to get fixed. And it would cost about $3,000. And my predator thought, no, that's too much. And he decided not to fix the kid car. So my kids didn't have a car. But then he turned around and he bought his new partner a Mustang.
Oh.
So,
and how much is a Mustang?
Well, more than $3,000. Yeah. So what my kids needed the kid car, and they needed something that they could rely on. It was too inconvenient for my predator to provide that. However, my predator had no issue going out and buying a brand new Mustang for his new partner.
And did the kids question this?
Yes.
So I think there's a lot of truth, Jill, to what you're saying in terms of they are always going to seek to meet their own needs using prey. So to the degree to which the children are prey is the degree to which they will try to serve their needs with the children. Having said that, there are roles that the predator can put children in, and some of those roles are not clear or are not really that upsetting for the child until many years later. So, for example, there's a role of scapegoat. That's almost always a devastating space for a child to be in. But the predator will use one child, especially when there's multiple children. The predator will use one to be the golden child, and the golden child might get what they want. And that one's harder to see. And then the scapegoated child will get blamed for everything. So if they don't buy them a car, it's not because they're cheap. It's because that child is lazy, or that child doesn't work hard enough, or that child needs to learn a thing or two about real life, or that child is spoiled and needs to grow up. So they'll frame it in a way that makes them sound like they're trying to do the right thing for the child. But
before you go on, this has to do with one of our podcasts with one of our guests.
Yes.
So please listen.
Oh, totally. Yeah, Amber, that's right. Because we had actually almost this identical conversation with one of our guests. Parker was on, and he was telling us about how his predator parent had purchased a car for him in her name, and then had taken the money. And then when she wouldn't help him buy another car, even after she made him sell his original car, her response to him was something like, "Well, I'm just trying to make a man out of you."
I think she said, I hope that you can make some better choices down the road.
Right. Or something. Yeah.
Give me a break.
So I think when you're in the golden child role, I think the predators are harder to see because you're getting some of those, what it feels like you're getting some of your needs met. But sometimes the parent gets something out of when a child is maybe super obedient or very submissive, or just a really good child, like maybe they're really bright, maybe they're very talented in a certain area, so they let the parent shine. The parent can be very proud of them, or vice versa, if they're very sick or very weak, and the parent can have a lot of control over them. So there's different types of predators who want children who have golden children for different reasons. So, but it is hard if you are the golden child, it is hard to see the predatory behaviors because you are getting what feels like some of those things met, a lot of praise, a lot of maybe material things, a lot of support, or maybe even enabling behavior. So that enabling behavior is super dangerous. It's almost like being a puppet on a string.
Do you have specific examples of this? I think it's always good to deal in specifics for our listeners as well, because I think really helps us to connect, stories.
Yeah, like I worked with somebody about 5 years ago, actually. I worked with somebody in practice where he had come and he had always been really close with his mom, and nobody else could get along with his mom, but he was really tight with her and essentially just felt very loved by her and very connected. And everything went really well in his life until he was about 25 or 30. And at that point, he had a spouse, and the spouse was saying like, wow, your mom treats me so badly. And when he tried to confront the mom, she essentially just like, you need to get out of my life. You're a terrible person. She just cut those puppet strings, just click, click, click. So he hadn't seen the predatory behavior really clearly until he tried to stand up to her. And he had literally never really tried to stand up to her. But because he had started seeing how she behaved with other relationships, he thought, this was something, well, I need to protect my wife. And the second he did that, he was cut out of his mom's life, like just cut out. So the coldness and the cruelty, and the story of Parker comes to mind too, where just this, I'm doing it for you, right?
Yeah.
Like this is in your best interest.
And probably Jill's a predator would probably say the same thing.
Yeah.
I didn't buy you a...
I have an example too. One of my kids went on, I think when she was in grade 12, went to Cambodia or somewhere on some school trip. And we paid for half of her fare. And then when it was time for another one of our kids to go on her grade 12 trip, my predator said, no, I'm not going to help. And I said, well, why not? Like you can't help one and not another. And then my predator said, well, I think that helping our first kid didn't really help them develop appropriate financial skills.
So not making that mistake again.
That's right.
Interesting.
So then I just paid his share because that's crap.
Right.
We help one, we help them all.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, you would hope that you would have some justice, right, mindset. But Jill, you were saying you had a bunch of other stuff to share.
I have so much. Okay, so I think the big question of the day is, how do you support your children?
Right.
You want to make sure that you are doing your work. You need to be healthy spiritually, financially, emotionally, mentally, psychologically, so you can support your kids.
That reminds me of like on the airplanes, put on
on your own
Your mask
Your own
first
mask
before
first.
you put it on the child.
Yeah. And I think that is something that parents, like, they're so concerned about supporting their kids that they ignore themselves, and it actually backfires. Okay, this next thing might be sort of hard to hear. And I first learned this, I was taking a course on how to support your kids when their friends die, because where we live, we had a rash of high schoolers that either committed suicide or died in different accidents a few years back. And what the speaker was saying, don't try to take away the emotions that your kids are feeling.
Yeah.
Don't try and sugarcoat things to such an extent that you're taking away their ability to feel. Kids need to feel. If kids are going to get through this, they need to feel. Your kids need to figure out what their parent is like. It's not really up to you to tell your kids what their parent is like. They actually have to figure it out themselves.
That's interesting. So you wouldn't, or maybe you have not told your child or children your ex is a predator. You haven't used that sentence on them.
No, but my kids know. They figured it out. They're smart enough.
When do you think you use those words or use that terminology, predator? Do they have to get to a certain point or a certain age, or?
I think they need to. They need to do their work. They need to become aware themselves. Yeah,
and I couldn't agree more in terms of it doesn't do kids any good to hear your experience of anything, really. We try as much as we want to share our own experiences with our children. Very rarely do I want to hear, a lot of advice from my parents or anybody really. What is really valuable to me is somebody hearing my experience of things. And so I think, and I would agree wholeheartedly that even though I think it also is dangerous though, because a lot of times we're told as parents, never say anything negative about about the other person. And so we do tend to try to sugarcoat, or I've seen that a lot, like, oh, maybe mommy was having a bad day, or maybe daddy was distracted.
So it's almost going to the other end, which is making excuses for.
Well, because you're kind of taught, like, you're taught in a lot of like these, support, like,
co-parenting
classes and
I
stuff.
had to take those.
And I think that, 95% of the time, those classes are absolutely spot on. And it doesn't do your child any good to know that you got hurt, or that, mom or dad was like this with their partner, because children can have a different relationship and do have often a different relationship with their parents than a spouse would. But having said that, and I think, Jill, like you were saying, is not to point out everything, not to point out things that are bad, not to sugarcoat things and make them look good. But I like to say what you can do for kids is hear them, really hear the emotion behind what they're saying, stay curious in it, and then help them have a language for it, as well as share with them your emotional response around it, not in a way of like you're putting your emotions on your child. But here would be an example. I know, Amber, you're going to ask me for an example. But here would be an example where, one of the kids comes home and says, let's say, mommy asked me to play a game and I said I didn't want to. And then mommy asked me 12 more times if I wanted to play the game. And I really felt like I had to play the game. And then I played the game and mommy won the game, and mommy ran around dancing and saying how she's awesome. And she's a winner and I'm a loser. And then I just went.
Mommy's not very nice to play games with.
And then I went into the bathroom and then I cried.
Yeah.
So instead of saying like, wow, that's because your mom is a terrible predator, or even like, wow, it sounds like mommy just thought you were going to play a nice game together. Maybe she got overexcited. Those would be really bad examples. But I think being able to be present and say,
I bet that hurt.
Yeah, it sounds like that was really upsetting for you. Can you tell me a little bit more about what happened for you there? or even helping the language. Like it sounds like your no wasn't respected. And okay, so when you have that feeling, you might be able to look and say, what's going on for me right now when I feel this way? What's happening inside me? Maybe my no is not being respected. Maybe I don't feel heard or listened to. And I think the other piece that we can do that's helpful for kids is when I say give your own emotional response, say something like, I feel really disappointed inside and really sad that your no wasn't listened to.
And I think the only way that we can provide feedback like that is to be our own best selves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I want to clarify something, though, because I think sometimes when people hear do your own work, they hear take care of yourself. And sometimes people like, oh, take care of yourself means I meet my own needs all the time, and the kids' needs are not important. I just meet my needs, like so I can like send them to a babysitter for a month and go crazy in Mexico or something like that. Like, and I think one of the things to keep in mind is, yes, you need to do your own work, but your children are all you have. And if you have a predator parent as the other half of your children's lives, then doing your own work is important, but not at the expense of being present for your kids.
Because it almost becomes predatorial in a way.
Yes.
Because like what you said, Joe, was their wants don't matter. The predator's wants are most important. And in that situation that you're describing, PJ, it would be, well, mama needs to do her work, so I'm going to go off for a month and run around in Mexico.
And not that I think, Jill, that's what you were
No,
suggesting.
No.
But it's good to clarify for our audience and for people listening going, well, I'm confused, because it is predatorial to have that language, at the expense of your child or children.
And I think what happens, because prey often have been so suppressed and controlled and in a state of collapse or in a state of please and appease and in this, sort of negative space, to be freed from that is to be let out of a sort of psychological prison. And it's not understandable why somebody would want to just, okay, for the first time in, a decade, 2 decades, 3 decades, I get to explore myself and my life and my choices but I think that if you are prey, that you are probably our best hope for your children's mental health. And if you have one person who's sucking the life and using the children for their own needs, and you have the other one who's either absent or sowing their oats, then there is nobody for those kids. And so I think doing your own work, I think the best place on the planet for the prey and the children in this moment is in an environment where there is support, where you can have people love on your children and take them maybe for a weekend while you relax or self-care, but the children are loved and valued and cared
I love
for.
that. That's really good.
Yeah.
Or where you can all be loved and valued and cared for. Maybe somebody brings
as a group. I like that you brought that up, because I think even when you said that, do your own work, it kind of had images of, lately in the news, it talks about I'm doing my own research. And it can be so like just Google and, there's not an understanding of what real research means. Like for myself, I have a person in my life who's getting their PhD. So it's like, I understand talking to them what real research means. Like there's so many steps that go into it, and there's procedures and protocols, and it's not just going on Google and looking up what somebody said. So it's really interesting that you said that. So you said surrounding yourself with people that maybe can take you in. Do you, Jill, have any either options that you think would be doing your work that would include your children or would be helpful to your children?
I think being in a community where you can be cared for as a family is very important. Like I remember once this individual who was very dear to us, she made my kids all little owl stuffies. She sewed them each an owl because owls are wise. And my kids all have those owls to this day. Often as a community, we don't know what to do.
You're right. Absolutely.
Yeah, we don't know what to do. However, that doesn't give us license not to do anything.
Let's say amen to that.
Yes. So, one example is owls. Another example is we did surround ourselves with 3 or 4 or 5 different families who loved me and loved our kids. And I could phone them up at any time. And they were for us.
Yeah, and I would speak to that in the sense of what would you recommend if you don't have that? If you don't have a community to surround you and it's you and your kids, what would you recommend? Is there anything?
I think that this is kind of almost a painful question because I think sometimes about, the idea of being a parent is your number one job is to protect your kids. Mm-hmm. And when your children have to be with somebody who you understand to be a predator, the legal system is going to give you probably zero support. Mm-hmm. And so your children are going to have to be exposed to someone who hurts them in any number of ways. And you have no say on it because there's no bruises. Mm-hmm. And so therefore there's no valid reason for you to do anything other than to allow them to go. So there's this kind of like, you've got this mother bear instinct. Even if you're a father, you have the mother bear instinct. And yet you're allowing your children to go off and be hurt by somebody. But I think at the same time, recognizing that your children have you, and if you can help them to have an understanding of what happens inside them when they're hurt and connect that to words and language, then you give them a really good fighting start. Because if you don't help them with the language, if you're not able to say, wow, it sounds like that person, made a demand. And they didn't request something from you. They demanded it. And when you didn't say yes, they withdrew their affection. And I know that's one of the most painful things somebody can do to me. I wonder what happens for you inside and do you think that it's okay for you to be able to say no sometimes?
So it's sitting down with your children and breaking it down for them.
If you're not able to help them process those things and build a language for those things, which means you
have to have a language.
You have to have a language for those
Circling
things.
back
to
doing your work.
That's exactly what you're saying, Jill, right? I mean, if you're not able to do that work or have that language or have done your own research around this stuff, which hopefully is what our listeners are doing by listening to this podcast, among other things, when your children are able to see behavior as behavior. For example, if I am 8 years old and I can say, oh, my mom made a demand that I play a game with her. And when I said no, she got angry. Well, I know it was a demand because she got angry. And that hurts my feelings. I feel upset. I don't want somebody to withdraw their love because I should have I want to be able to say no. It's healthy to be able to say no and have somebody respect that no. So that if that child experiences that again at the hands of a predator, that child can go, oh, my dad or my mom is giving me a demand. They're not actually asking me. They're demanding.
So you're empowering a child with tools
that
to see and to recognize predatory behavior.
Absolutely. Or even with gaslighting, well, it sounds like, this happened, but, dad said that happened, even though that's not what you said or did. Now, if that's the case, then that's something we call gaslighting. Mm-hmm. So one of the things you want to do, though, is present these things not in a state where you have emotional energy around it. Listening to the child, not putting words in the child's mouth. So not saying, well, this is gaslighting. That's what that is. Your dad's a gaslighter, because that's destructive. But instead saying, okay, so if this is the case, stay in that curious spot. So if that's the case that you asked for that and you got this instead, and then, like I asked for an apple and maybe dad gave me an orange. And then I said, Dad, I asked for an apple. And he said, no, you didn't. You asked for an orange. And you say, no, look, I wrote it down on this piece of paper. Oh, that's a piece of paper you gave me last week. But I know I did it this week. Okay. So when somebody does that behavior, it sounds like that's what's called gaslighting, which is somebody doesn't want to take ownership. Is it possible that there's, that this person doesn't want to take ownership? And maybe it's painful or maybe it's hard. But what is wonderful is when somebody is able to own things. And it sounds like in this case, mom wasn't able to own that. And that was too hard for them for whatever reason. Mm-hmm. But how did that feel for you? Well, I felt angry. Yeah, I feel angry too when that happens. But if I say it with energy behind it, like whether that's kind of like devastated, like, oh, I can't believe your mother's doing this again. She did this to me for years. Oh, my word. Now I'm layering my own pain on the child and my own experiences. And that's not okay. No. But if I can say it without energy, whether that's like sad energy or angry energy, I can just be a safe person for my child to come and talk to and learn a language from, almost like a teacher. Yeah. But staying in that curious space with them and not, even if you're feeling, I'm not saying you might feel a lot of emotions.
Yeah.
But that's different than letting the child feel, because then the child's not going to keep talking to you.
No, exactly.
Right? They'll shut down. If they see you getting really angry, they're going to try to protect you.
Well, you're not safe anymore. You're in a different stage. You're in fight or flight or fight. Right. And so you're not safe.
Yeah. And that doesn't require you to throw the other parent under the bus either. Just because somebody did this behavior, like Amber, you're a great example. You have a parent who's a predator that you can have some relationship with. And so for you, it's more valuable for you to have some relationship with that parent than none. And so letting your child have the freedom to make that choice is really vital.
Well, I think for my situation, I think the number one thing a predator parent will do for a child is to disempower them from their own. It's almost cutting them off from their own sense of what they want or feel, because the predator parent wants to be in control. So you don't feel that. You don't want that. I can't even tell you how many times, like even as a kid, I want that. No, you don't. You don't want that. What you want is this.
Yeah, great point.
So I would say if I was to give any sort of language for someone to take away, it would be that idea of, I think as a parent who's maybe stepped away from a predator relationship and you're a prey with your children, is empower them to know who and what they are and what they like and what they don't like. And it's their decision.
Really hear them.
Yeah, really hear them. Because I know of a child, I remember babysitting them years ago, and I know that one of their parents was a predator. And they were telling me about, my mom has been telling me I have these issues and I can't do this, or I have intolerances for eating and sleeping and all this stuff. And I remember thinking, I haven't seen that, and they haven't been diagnosed with that. And I felt like the parent was putting it on this child. And I said to the child, can you sleep? Can you eat this? Well, yeah. Then I don't think it looks like you have an issue. But if you do, you need to tell somebody. But right now, in this moment, it sounds like you're perfectly normal. And I just kind of reinforced that what they thought of themselves was more important than what this parent was putting on them. Now, I don't know if that was the best way of managing it, but I wanted to empower them in that moment rather than hearing that voice, the predator voice, which is, let me tell you who and what you are.
Right.
What do you think?
Yeah.
Can you eat a slice of bread and not, whatever, have issues with it? Okay, so you can. Maybe you're okay with gluten. Now, there's people that have intolerances. I get that. But I'm just saying it's about, for them, building up that muscle in them, that self-empowering muscle, because that's taken me years to get that voice out of my head of the predator parent who's wanting their voice to be the number one voice.
Wanting you to doubt your voice so they have more power.
Because my voice wasn't my voice, or it wasn't important. Because it comes back to what even Jill said. It's like what they want.
Doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. Or what the child wants. It doesn't matter.
Or needs. Yeah.
I think one thing that's important for parents, especially prey parents, to hear is that sometimes when your children are exposed to a predator situation, your children will sometimes come home to you sounding and reminding you a lot like your predator.
That's right.
And I think that being able to hold space for your child to have that voice, even though you know where the voice is from, and even though you know what has impacted that voice, and maybe to not like you or to demean you or dismiss you or anything along those lines.
Or do the things that parent does to you.
I think that is something so complex, and you really need support and help around that, because you tend to overreact, and then it almost will reinforce the child's belief system. And so really being able to hold true to truth and not be defensive or criticizing of the child, but instead hear the seed of truth, own and acknowledge what you can, and then use that ability to be curious, to stay true to really hearing your child and wondering what's going on for them, or where they see that, or how they hear it. So I just think that's something that I think is so painful for the prey parent.
That's a whole other podcast, I think.
Yeah.
Can we do a little takeaway? Like, what would you take away or want to give as a tip?
I want to throw out a recommendation of a book that I think has probably been the most helpful book in giving me a language with my children, for how to help them have a language for what is healthy and life-giving and what is predatory. And that's Nonviolent Communication, with Marshall Rosenberg. Probably of all books I've read in terms of it's a life-changing kind of structure to understanding things. But even just how he talks about the difference between want to energy, have to energy, or what the difference between a demand and a request. You'll hear on this podcast a lot of things that I see and have language for is really because of that book. So,
and that's what I want to add is I want to recommend Will I Ever Be Good Enough by Carol McBride. And it's a book for children of narcissistic, or we would say predatory parents, specifically mothers. It helped me. It gave me a language. It also helps you navigate the complexities of being a child of a predator. So I want to put that out there.
That's good.
Awesome.
Thanks. That's it, everyone. Stay tuned for more episodes where we answer your questions, and please feel free to reach out to us on Instagram and submit any other questions you have. Thank you to everyone who listened today, and we hope it helped to give you some ideas of how to support people in prey-predator relationships. Please remember, you are not alone.